stole these hands. I stole these feet. And one of the reasons that I had to dig my way back up out of my grave to be here today is that of my knees. After 20 years, and before that 20-year mark, I spent a lot of time on my knees. On my knees praying for that one day would arrive. And it did arrive on September the 3rd, 1838, when I focused my sights on my freedom. As I begin, first and foremost, I want to thank each and every one of you all for being here this afternoon, on this nice, balmy afternoon. I come here all the way from Rochester, New York, and forgive me, I had to tell my two wives that I would be back. So they gave me permission to come in today to be with you. I would like to start off in an unusual way today. I would like to start off with my friendship with my good friend who I had a maybe 3-year relationship with. Friendship relationship, if you will. Business relationship as well, with no other than John Brown. John Brown and I, well, let me tell you a little bit about John. John, he tried out many different fields professionally until he heard that there was a slave insurrection going on in Kansas. John and his two sons made their way to Rochester, where my wife and my family was residing on South Street. Knowing that John had this inkling that he wanted the end of slavery, and he was willing to go to the end of the world to bring it to an end, even if it meant bringing himself to an end. In our meeting, I invited John to reside at my home until he could get himself together. John insisted on paying me for the shelter, but being the kind of guy that I am, I invited him in at no charge. Now, I got to let you know that John, he was a kind of witty guy, if you will. He enjoyed having fun as well as want to kill those slave owners. So being that he wanted to have fun and loved having fun, my children took a liking to him. I would see him on a daily prior to his leaving, having a talk, having jokes, and kiddie times with my 4 children. So they quite naturally started calling him Uncle John. Well, in the midst of it, of my wife Anna, making sure that he was healthy by feeding him good meals, and making sure he got the proper rest by providing an adequate room for him, and the mere fact of introducing him to some of the things that I was involved in. But John was sold on making sure that he got his hands on those slave owners, because he was bent on doing away with slavery. And ladies and gentlemen, I tell you today that I loved him for that. I loved him because of the fact that he was a white man sold on, bent on, glued on, destroying slavery. Even though his glue, his bent, was, how can I say it, in a rush. He was in a rush to assure that slavery would come to an end. And he even had some young men, besides his sons, that would travel with him to assure the destruction of slavery. As I relationship started coming to an end, I'll never forget the day that I met with John down in the valley. It was him and I and a couple of his, if you will, soldiers. A couple of these soldiers were black men. They were free and enslaved. They were running from slavery as well. So in this valley, John and I had a heart-to-heart where he begged me to come and go with him. In such a manner, Frederick, I really could use your help. And making a stand and doing away with slavery. Well, John, how do you plan on doing that? He says, I want to go to Harper's Ferry. And at Harper's Ferry, I want to assure that we do some damage. To make a stand and to let this country know that slavery must come to an end. My response, as we stood like this to each other, I said, but John, you're about to fight a losing battle. You cannot win. John's only response to me was, whether I live or whether I die. This is something that is in my heart to do. And I even shouted out to one of his married men, stop this, stop John from doing this. And the married man responded, Mr. Douglas, I must go with Mr. Brown. Well, we hugged, and I felt compelled to give him a gift. So I gave him my stopwatch with my name on it. He took that stopwatch and put it in his pocket, and he turned around and he said, thank you, Frederick, but I really wish you would go with me. And he turned off to leave. Next thing I know, yes, he made his way with his married men to Harper's Ferry, but he was captured. He did damage. Yes, he killed a number of soldiers, but in the end of the day, he was captured. They didn't kill him right away. They kept him, my good friend John, incarcerated. Oh, I'm sorry, they didn't use that word back then. But they kept him jailed for maybe about maybe about a month. And in the midst of them keeping him jailed, guess who they were looking for? They were looking for me. And that's when William Lloyd Garrison burst in the house one Saturday. And he said, Frederick, you got to leave. You got to leave. They're looking for you. Who's looking for me? The lawmen, the soldiers. They're looking for you. Looking for me for what? Because you are an associate. They have put you as an associate with John Brown. You put John Brown up to going to Harper's Ferry and murdering the soldiers. Mr. Garrison, I said, I was the one that tried to talk him out of doing that. He said, but still you must leave. Well, I get on a ship, if you will, and I traveled overseas. And the good thing I did, because when they found he hung John Brown, they found something special on him. They found the watch. And that made them even eager to come after me. Well, guess what? There was another gentleman, black, furry hair like me, looked just like me. Well, they captured him. And they could have sworn they had Frederick Douglass. Well, they hung the wrong man while I was overseas in a gala drinking wine. Yes. So I escaped that. Well, that was the end of my good friend John Brown. And it hurted me to know that he was hung for doing a great thing. Now, it's funny because, and maybe it's not funny, because of the fact that in 1864, on one of my visits to the White House, and visiting President Abraham Lincoln, who this time around, would you believe, he sent for me. He had the courage to come to my house. I get in the carriage, and the carriage takes me to the train station, which takes me to Washington, D.C. When I get to the White House, I go up in the Oval House, the Oval Office, and Mr. Lincoln and I, we began to chatter. His chatter to me was, Frederick, I need you. I need you to round up some troops. And I need you to go to Texas. And I need you to go get the slaves, because I got a feeling something is getting ready to happen. And he says, Frederick, will you help me? And the only response I gave to him was, Mr. President, you sure you want me to do this? He said, yes, I need you. Well, as he was saying this, I had a thought that come to my mind, a flashback. This reminds me of my friend John Brown. Has he been talking to John? Because that's what it put me in mind of. That I'm going to resurrect, if you will, slaves. John Brown, he wanted to do away with, per se, the enemies to free the slaves. So it put me, yes, in mind of my good friend John Brown. Well, I did mention to you that I had a visit to the White House. Let me gather my chair here. And this chair plays a very important part, ladies and gentlemen. So please do not wonder, why is Frederick going to get the chair? While in Rochester, there were some things that were going on that I was not in agreement with. I had no appointment to see the President of the United States, who was elected in 1860. Now, let me go a little bit back further, because I want to bring all this into fold so you can see where I'm at. When Abraham Lincoln put his hat in the ring to become, or vying to be elected as President of these United States, there were three other gentlemen that were vying for that same spot, if you will, that same office. Who were the other three gentlemen? Well, there was a gentleman by the name of Mr. Richardson. I wasn't too keen on Mr. Richardson, because when he spoke about the slaves, he was speaking in reference to spreading slavery throughout the country. So I knew right then that Mr. Richardson would not get my vote. The other gentleman, he kind of put a smile on my face. The reason he put a smile on my face because his last name was the same as mine, Douglas. And come to find out, he spelled his last name the same the way I did. 2 S's, Douglas. So quite naturally, he won me over. Until I found out what his campaign entailed. His campaign entailed that he wanted slavery to continue, and not just continue, but he wanted it to spread. So quite naturally, that was the end of the Douglas alike. And then there was this tall, slim gentleman from Illinois. We all know him as Abraham Lincoln. Well, Mr. Lincoln, his campaign was, no, he was not to end slavery, okay, but he did not want to increase slavery. So that kind of got my ear. Now, his wife, in case you didn't notice, his wife, Mary Lincoln, she was for slavery. She wanted slavery to go on. And just a little bit of tidbit on Mary, and then I'll move on. In their hometown in Illinois, Mary was not a favorite. And not only that, are you ready for this? Please don't pick it up. If this get out, I know how it got out. Okay? And I will race back to my grave and say, I know nothing. But come to find out, Mary Lincoln, in the early years, had a relationship with that other Douglas. Yes, in her younger days, she had a relationship with that Douglas. And they kind of got along great within their relationship. But a snag came, and that's why they broke up and went their separate ways. And who was to say that later on, he would meet that tall, slim gentleman, Mr. Lincoln? Well, as the campaign 1860 moved on, quite naturally, or 1859 moved on, I jumped on board and I helped, if you will, to get him elected by having my black people, if you will, the free ones, to fall in line so that we can get this man elected. And sir, 1860, he got elected. Well, 1862 of October, like I said prior, there were some things that were going on in the country, sir, that I was not in line with. So I took it upon myself to board a train and make my way to Washington, D.C. Now, please understand, ladies and gentlemen, we're not talking about the White House 2023, where they have the soldiers and you got soldiers on top of the building, the lookouts and what have you. We're talking about the calm, cool, and inviting White House of 1860 or 62. So I made my way to the White House, and quite naturally, I didn't make my way to the front door because I was not allowed in the front door. The moral of the story back then was no Negroes allowed. You want to come in? There's a back door. But I made my way to the White House, and I found myself on a stairwell with maybe about 20 other white gentlemen. Somehow, I managed to be fourth from the top. And out of nowhere, I hear this calm voice. Frederick Douglass. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I wasn't expecting to be called so soon. I was like, maybe because I'm the black one or the black sheep of all these guys, maybe I'll be called 2 weeks later. But out of nowhere, I hear Frederick Douglass. So quite naturally, I got out of line and I made my way up. As I got up, they put me in a room, the waiting room. So as I'm sitting in the room, trying to get my thoughts together of what I'm going to say to the President of these United States, the door opened up and there was a gentleman, and the gentleman walked in, closed the door behind him. I didn't know who he was, but all of a sudden, he asked me one question. He asked me, are you ready for this? Are you the President of the United States? Sarcastically. And sarcastically, I responded back and said, no, I'm Frederick Douglass. And he just turned around and left out. A few minutes later, I hear my name again. Frederick Douglass, the President is ready to see you now. So I gather myself, and I go into the Oval Office. As I walk in the Oval Office, quite naturally, there he is, sitting behind his big, gigantic desk. He says, come on in, Mr. Douglass. So as I come in, and I get closer to him, he stands up. As he stands up, quite naturally, like a little boy, my neck starts to hurt because I'm 6'4". You're looking at 6'4", slim. And he says, how are you? I said, I'm doing good, Mr. President. So he offers his handshake. I shake his hand. And then he says that, Mr. Douglass, I heard some bad things you've been saying about me. And I said, oh? He said, yes, you say I'm slothful. I'm slow. I said, sir, I just speak the truth. So he says, would he invite himself? He says, have a seat. So ladies and gentlemen, I had a seat. Now, let me bring it up to 2023. Now, I'm sure that everybody in here probably have grandchildren that are kids and probably teenagers. And I'm sure you probably have teenagers and grandkids that listen to today's rap music. Okay? And some of you all, I can see the expressions on your face. Oh, Lord, get out my house with that noise. So anyway, some of the guys, your grandsons, when they take a seat, they have a seat such as, no pun intended. Oh, Grandma, why you tripping? Why you tripping, Grandma? Papa, come on now. And you be like, sit up. I am sitting up. Or they'll come in, they sagging. All right? So let me just show you the dignified way of how a man should sit. Such as. That is a dignified way of sitting. And ladies and gentlemen, me, a former slave, I walked in and I sat in such a dignified manner addressing the President of the United States of America. So, as we began our conversation, Mr. President, he says to me, Mr. Douglas, how can I help you? Well, first of all, I'll say again, thank you, sir, for seeing me on this unscheduled time. But, sir, I come to you because I have 3 matter of issues that I must discuss. And it's really tagging at my heart. Well, go on, Mr. Douglas, he says. I said, sir, I come again because these issues are really pressing. And I think at the time where this country is, I think our help, our inclusion will help in the civil war that is taking place. Sir, there's no way that this country will be able to win with one arm behind their back. He says, explain. I say, right now, sir, as you are fighting this war, it's just the white soldiers that are fighting. But just think about, sir, if you could open up the door to include the black men into this war, how the victory will surely end in sweetness. He says, okay. I said, and not only that, sir, with the inclusion of the black soldier fighting alongside the white soldier, not just fighting alongside, but having the same rights. Not only the same rights, but getting the same amount of pay. Not only the same amount of pay, but having the opportunity to sleep in the barracks, if you will, and in comfort. And more importantly, if my black man in your war is captured, they will be treated like the white soldiers who are captured. Not because of their color of their skin. That will make a difference, sir. He says, okay. And also, sir, I would like to talk to you about another subject that is on my mind, and that is we as a people having the opportunity to be free from slavery. Sir, we come to this country in 1619, and we have suffered tremendously for almost 200 years. So, sir, if you could grant that wish, oh, how free, oh, how wonderful that would be. And lastly, in reference to the voting, if you would give women of this country the right to vote. Sir, we as men, yes, we run this country, but just imagine if the right and the privilege was given to all women, not just black women, I'm talking to all women in this country to vote. Just imagine how even the scale would be. Well, after I got finished, ma'am, you know what the president did? He got up and he went to his window. He opened up the curtain, he squeezed it, and he looked, and maybe he was there for maybe about a minute. You know what he was looking at, ladies and gentlemen? He was looking at 1963, August 28th, Washington, D.C., with Martin Luther King Jr. standing there on the podium, saying that famous speech of his, "Free at last." And all he could see was, free at last, thank God Almighty, we're free at last. So if Abraham Lincoln, president, got his way, ladies and gentlemen, black people in this country would not be free until after Martin Luther King said that famous speech. So that would have been, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a math major, but here we are in 2023. That would have occurred in 1963. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, that's what, somebody who's a mathematician here, 60 years. 60 years black people would have been free in this country if we would have went with the thinking of President Abraham Lincoln. So after he has had that minute of looking out the window, he comes back to me and he says, well, Mr. Douglas, I appreciate your thought, and I appreciate your kindness and your want. But I must say that if we move too fast on this subject, it's only going to cause more trouble in this country. So, sir, Frederick, Mr. Douglas, I will think on it. Allow me to think on it. I just looked at him. I just looked at him like an empty face, if you will. And I said, okay, sir. I gathered myself, I stood up, and I shook his hand, and I made my way out of the White House. Now, once I got outside of the White House, I stood and looked back at the White House, and my chest was so expanded, it's almost like the buttons on my shirt started bursting. Because as I looked back and I said to myself, I feel so good as a black man being in the White House. So I wanted to say that, ladies and gentlemen, because I know some of you all are probably sitting here thinking that your president, what's his name, Barack Obama, was the first black man. Well, I know, now you know, he was not the first black man. I was. Thank you. So moving on. I went back to Rochester, and believe it or not, it was December the 31st. We were all gathered in the church there, the AME church there in Rochester, and quite naturally, every December the 31st, that's where you find us praising and preparing for the new year to come in. Well, this particular time, as we were in the church, praising and giving all thanks to our good Lord and putting our sights on the new year that is a coming of 1863, all of a sudden out of nowhere, the door opened and a soldier came in. When the soldier came in, he hustled his way back up to the front. He stood on stage by the podium. We all looked in dismay. He's like, okay, what is this white man doing here? But as he got up and he went inside his jacket, he came out and he unraveled the paper. And he started reading the paper. He said, "Heal thee, heal thee, heal thee. As of this day, 1 January 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation, signed by the 16th President of these United States of America, Abraham Lincoln. This proclamation proclaims that on this day, all Negroes in this country is now forever free." And then he took it and he wrapped it back up and he gave it to the pastor and he made his way out. Ladies and gentlemen, I, as Frederick Douglass, up to this day, have really never shed tears as a free man. Now, I must tell you in truth that as a slave, I did shed tears. And you hold on, because I will share my slavery years with you. But at this moment, knowing that finally we were free in this country, I shed great tears. And I cried like a little baby, like all the others that were gathered there in that church, to know that finally we were free. Moving on. I wound up gathering my family and making our way to Anacostia, which is outside of Washington, D.C. I wound up packing my family up because of the fact that, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, my home was bombed. My home was bombed by KKK. So that caused us to move. In that bombing, I wound up losing a lot of my print, my newspapers, the North Star, and various other collections. So I felt it was time that we packed up and moved. And to be honest with you, we had no idea where we would move to, but thanks to President Garfield, we moved to Anacostia, to that big mansion on the hill. And one reason we moved because of the fact that, like I said, the KKK, but President Garfield had a job lined up for me. And the job, believe it or not, to become the first, hold yourself now, to become the first black sheriff of Washington, D.C. Now, before I go any further, can I go back in time? Can I have your permission to go back in time? Thank you very much. Is everybody still with me? Well, thank you. Well, I'm going to go back in time. Thank you, sir. He's the only one that's with me because he's like, I'm here. I didn't know we was in the first grade again. Well, I didn't tell you that I was born February the 14th, 1818. I was born in Western Maryland on a plantation called the Lord's Plantation. And ladies and gentlemen, believe it or not, that Lord's Plantation is still active today, minus slaves. So the family of the Lords still control and still live on that property today in 2023. Well, like I was saying, I had a mother. My mother, Harriet Bell. Harriet was the fourth child of 10 children. My mother, what she would do, she would make her way from another plantation 3 times a week. She would make her way during the dark, and please understand, ladies and gentlemen, she had to be back on that plantation before the sun came up. It is also noted that my mother, Harriet, even though she had to be back on that plantation before the sun came up, I have you know that she was very educated. She taught herself how to read. Now, can you imagine in the pit of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, with no shoes on, running through the woods to come see her baby boy? And she would come and see me by the moonlight. She would pick me up, hug me, rock me. And as a matter of fact, Valentine's Day, your Valentine's Day, is when I was born, February the 14th. And she came up with her own song. Ma'am, I just wish you would have copyrighted it, because we still could be making some money. But she didn't. The name of the song is My Little Valentine. And she would sing that song to me as she rocked me. I would feel her rocking me. Though I never saw her, but I could feel her rocking me, and I could feel her hugging me. And I could feel the warmth that I needed as a little baby. She came to see me at least about 3 or 4 times. After that, ladies and gentlemen, I never saw my mother again. I never saw my mother, so much so that when she passed away, I had no feelings. I had no feelings because I really didn't know my mother. But I did have a grandmother by the name of Betty Bailey. I love my grandmother. That's right. I was like her little shadow. Everywhere she went, I had to be there with her. Yes, and some of you all probably have grandchildren just like that. You're calling your daughter or your son, come get this little baby. I can't move without it. Well, that's how it was with my grandmother. Everywhere Betty went, I went. As a matter of fact, we went on a 20-mile walk